In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, 3 brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Bryan, Frye, John Flack, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Hello, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Russell Guest, and joining me today is my co-host and good friend, Bryan Frye. A little under the weather, though.
Oh, it's okay. Good evening, everybody.
You're not a real movie-watching champion unless you watch in sickness and in health. That's how hardcore Bryan is.
Oh, I love sick movies. Sick movies meant no work movies.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, nothing makes you feel better than watching a crappy cable movie when you're sick and in bed. I remember I watched Anaconda when I was sick in bed the last time I was at home. And, as bad as I felt, I remember seeing the movie Anaconda and how bad it was. And it made me feel better about myself. So,
Oh, come on now. That was a solid John Voight Ice Cube outing.
It's also some early Owen Wilson action. But anyway,
that's true.
Today also joining us from Danville, Kentucky, first time on the show, Aaron Genton. How you doing, sir?
Doing good, gentlemen. It's good to be here. Appreciate you having me on, even though I am very difficult to get a hold of, as you've been trying to do for a while. And let's not forget, I think Jennifer Lopez was in that movie too, wasn't she?
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good call.
Aaron, what do you do for a living and in Danville, Kentucky?
So I currently work at a museum. It's a historic site. It's actually about 13, 14, 15 miles away from Danville. And my title is called Collections Manager, which sounds like I beat people up for money. What I actually do is care for a collection of artifacts that we have. So I have about 7,000 items in our collection of historic things, which is anything from large pieces of furniture to a journal or documents, things like that. So it's pretty much everything in between. And I'm responsible for all those resources, including creating access to that and sharing it with our staff and making it as accessible to those that are using it to give tours and do research and all those sorts of things. So it's a little bit of everything that comes to working with a collection of artifacts.
So Aaron's the guy at the end of Indiana Jones who works in that giant warehouse full of historic artifacts, going through one at
Correct.
a time. So
it all belongs in a museum. Never forget that.
Not to pull an Office Space here, but I'm going to go ahead and need you to say that you beat people up for money. That should be your official cover story.
Yeah.
So, as a historian and a history buff, what is your favorite period piece movie, Aaron?
Like, I kind of just will watch what is intriguing to me. And so I probably haven't seen as many history-related or period pieces as you might think. But the one that I remember, I think it was probably the last one that I saw, which tells you how often I see these kind of movies, was Selma, which was the one about Martin Luther King Jr. and the events surrounding Selma, Alabama. The reason I'm going to say that one, besides the fact that it was the last one I saw, because I've actually been to Selma, and before I saw that movie, I went to the town and walked around and saw some of the sites, and they filmed that movie on location there. And so it was just, to me, that's one of the things that makes history powerful, is in some cases you can still see these places today. The power of places, something that's really hard to describe, but it's something that always, for me, kind of took what was just a random assemblage of names and dates and facts and really gave some weight to them. And so I think that Selma was really powerful just from the standpoint of they were still able to go and walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which I did, and which the folks that did that back in that day, they walked in the same place. And so something like that to me is very interesting, very powerful. And so.
No, it is a good answer. Power of place is important. I like it.
Yeah, you understand that as an architecture person, so you get that.
Definitely. Yeah, places have stories to them. And speaking of stories, what is your favorite, I guess, superhero acting performance?
You're, you're, you're going to laugh at my answer because this is something we also talked about before, but I'm going to go way old school. And it's not so much the acting performance as what they were able to do with the resources that were available to them. And that's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that was done in the late 80s. I forget what year it was, late 80s, early 90s. Anyways, the fact that those guys were able to do what they did in those suits still blows my mind. And I just think it's impressive for the time period, and especially considering where superhero movies have gone today. It still is amazing. I'm going to give it to Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael.
Okay.
I literally gave Russell crap recently about not liking that movie on how it held up. I was like, you shut your mouth.
I don't think I've seen it in a couple years, and I'm sure it probably doesn't hold up as well as I thought it did, maybe in high school, but it still is just striking what they were able to do, I think.
Oh, I still love it.
No comment.
Shame.
I can't tell you how often I still say Pizza Dude's got 30 seconds. Like that is a quote I say at least on a monthly basis. Whenever we're working on something, it's like, all right, Pizza Dude's got 30 seconds.
And Aaron, what is a movie that you love that people have forgotten about or may not know of?
Well, here's the other one that I've been banging the drum on for a while, and that is Pee-wee's Big Adventure. That is my favorite movie, and I could watch that pretty regularly and still just laugh, like just giggle at everything that is funny in that movie. People probably don't think much about it or they write it off, but that one holds up. The jokes in that, the silliness, to me, maybe it's just me, but I will always laugh at everything in that movie.
Good answers. Early Tim Burton. I'm a huge Tim Burton fan, and I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, what is the last movie you saw?
Well, the last movie I saw before preparing for this podcast was Captain Marvel.
It was so good.
Yeah, I've been on the Marvel kick really in the past 6 months. I didn't really watch any of these movies until just recently, and so it was good. I did enjoy it. Still feel.
What's your favorite one so far?
I think it was Infinity War.
Yeah,
I think that having marathon most of these things and not spend a lot of time watching them. That to me was probably the most intriguing of them all. And I like Captain Marvel. It feels more like an appetizer for Endgame. So.
Listen, I totally agree with you. After watching Infinity War, I think we talked about this on a previous podcast, where I can't watch one of these movies without at least 3 or 4 characters being involved, because after seeing Infinity War, everything else just seems a little empty.
It seems a little small. Yeah.
Like the next one's got to have at least 40 characters, or else I'm just not even interested.
Right.
That's a lie. I'll see it anyway.
All this talk about superheroes. It's time to get into today's movie. Aaron, what's today's movie going to be?
Today's movie is going to be the X-Men movie that was filmed in the year 2000. So I guess technically it's the first X-Men movie in the current franchise.
That's right. So X-Men is wrapping up their Fox run, I should say, with the Dark Phoenix coming out this summer. And what better time to look back before it goes over to Disney property and becomes part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This movie released, as Aaron mentioned, in the year 2000. It grosses $157.2 million. That's a pretty strong showing. It comes in 8th in the box office. It places ahead of Scary Movie at number 9, and it places just behind Meet the Parents at number 7. If you're wondering what the number 1 movie was that year, it was Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. IMDb,
right?
Yeah. IMDb, yes, that was the number 1 movie. IMDb gives this 7.4, and Rotten Tomatoes, the critics give it 81%, and the audience is very closely aligned with that and gives it an 83%. No awards to show for this, but a lot of love.
After watching every single one of the Marvel Disney made movies, Is it wrong of me to go back and just criticize this one harshly? Like knowing what the franchise could have been or maybe will be once Disney gets a hold of it?
So it sounds like you're ready to go into your background on this one. So, Bryan, let me ask you first then. What was your first time seeing this one, and what is it like to come back to it now?
So I saw it in theaters, and I couldn't have been happier. I used to read Wizard magazine, which for all of you '90s kids and giant nerds, was a comic book collectible, basically all things nerd magazine. And they used to do these mock, like if we ever got a movie for these things that we love, this is who we would cast for it. And they actually nailed Patrick Stewart for Professor X, which I absolutely love. And being a Bryan Singer fan, because Usual Suspects is probably on my short list for best movie ever, I was super stoked. So not only did Bryan Singer get the directorial nod for this, but they were making a movie for my favorite comic book franchise. So it was all win for me. I watched the movie. I liked it. I wouldn't say that I loved it, but they were making it. Like that's all I cared about. It was one of those like, finally I get to see this now. So yeah, I'm all thumbs up for it, but man, I really can't wait until Disney gets a hold of this.
Okay, and so coming back to it now, I sense that you have it's like the room that's not as big as it was when you were in it as a kid.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, a lot of movies can be said about that. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for you. I mean, you're wrong, but whatever.
I can't fit in the building in that one.
It's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that, especially once you get to Last Stand, it gets a little bit of Peter Griffin knee bruise.
Okay. And so, Aaron, what about you? When did you first see this movie, and what were your expectations coming back in, and did you enjoy it this time around?
I saw it in a theater. I do remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember really enjoying it at the time. And I remember watching it probably on and off through high school, and then as my interest kind of shifted as I got through college, I just kind of went away from it. And so it has been a really long time since I'd seen this movie. I'm not sure what I expected going in, but I know that I expected probably not to feel the same way. I didn't have like super high expectations for it. And I watched it twice before tonight. So the first time I watched it, I was like, oh man, this isn't as good as I remember it. The second time I watched it, I was like, okay, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it more now. Maybe not as much as I did when I first saw it in high school, but I think I'm with you, Bryan. Like, I'm just like, it was good. And I think for the time that it was made, like, yes, it was actually pretty excellent. But I'm with you. I think we've all been spoiled by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'll throw into that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight or Batman movies. I think those two things together just kind of took whatever Bryan Singer did with these X-Men movies and said, yeah, that was good, but you've got a long way to go, son.
Totally agree with that.
And I think that's just changed our overall sort of like the world that we live in to some degree. And so that I think looking back through that lens causes me to be like, yeah, I can see how this was really good. And high school Aaron really did enjoy it. But felt a little differently about it now. Still I didn't hate it by any means, but it was not, exceptional.
That's when I met this high school Aaron. Aaron, Bryan, and I all met each other in high school and probably shared the same homeroom if I can remember correctly. So for me, the X-Men animated series was my, I guess you could say, the beginning of my love of X-Men. That debuted in 1992. I definitely had all the action figures coming out of that. They were poorly constructed, and they all seemed to fall apart. It was very unfortunate. Colossus's arms fell off. Storm's head fell off. I mean, I think Wolverine was the only one that actually still worked later. But
very appropriate.
Do you think that makes more sense given his character?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good point. It does. I guess it's the most durable and heals up. And so anyway, though, I got to this movie and I was really pumped, and I probably overblew this in my head before going in. And I actually, even in 2000, in 10th grade, me went in and saw this, and I came out honestly a little bit disappointed at the time. And I gave it another shot. I watched it with some friends again in college, and it has been on TV along the way as well. And it's got some things I really like about this movie, and it's a love-hate relationship I have with this movie, because there's parts of this that I really like, and there's parts of it that really frustrate me. Coming back to it now was kind of an interesting thing of like, have I built this up in my head, like that this movie's bad? And in the end, it's not bad. And I think maybe it was starting to sour more and more with time. But I do know that it has been eclipsed by other superhero movie efforts, much like you guys had said. And like I said, I have very mixed feelings about this one. And we're about to get into that. But in order to talk about X-Men, we got to spoil it. And if you don't like spoilers, and most people don't, you're going to want to turn this podcast off. Go watch X-Men from the year 2000. We'll be back after these messages.
Oh no! Dr. Boredom is looking to take over the whole city with his plan to make people listen to a continuous loop of his dissertation on why lint forms in the navel area and the typologies of lint that form there.
But wait, look overhead! Soaring through the air on his way to save us all from Dr. Boredom, it is the Retro Movie Roundtable Man. He came to Earth when his space shuttle from Planet Awesome was abruptly rerouted by a meteor. Now he fights to save us all, good Earthlings, from the dullness and lameness of the mundane life. With his powers to suggest great films, offer interesting movie insights, and a general love of movies, the Retro Movie Roundtable Man always saves the day. To summon the Retro Movie Roundtable Man, simply go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever your podcasts come from. Then subscribe to the show. Make sure to give the Retro Movie Roundtable a 5-star rating and review, and make his powers even stronger. Like the show on Facebook, email the team at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com.
Hooray! Retro Movie Roundtable Man has saved us all and restored interest and love for movies to the whole city. Thanks, Retro Movie Roundtable Man!
Aaron, why don't you refresh people who haven't seen X-Men in some time?
Maybe to set the scene a little bit, the movie is set in sort of a present-day scenario in which our country is divided over the issue of mutants. And these are people that are born with a biological mutation that gives them some kind of special powers. We see the country's divided really over the fear of what these people could potentially do as being dangerous. And it's come to the point in this movie where there's a debate over a Mutant Registration Act in the U.S. Senate. But there's an opposition to that, and the opposition to this Registration Act sees this as an infringement on the civil rights of the mutants. And so there is this very stark division within society over these things, but there's also a division within the mutant world, because amongst the mutants there is this fundamental question of how you respond to people that want to restrict your rights. So we have this division that's on full display in this movie as well, and it's really headed up by two main figures. The first is Professor Charles Xavier, who is leading a school for what he calls gifted children, and that really means mutants. And that school provides the public-facing front for the X-Men, which is essentially a group of good guys, of good mutants who are emphasizing tolerance and peaceful interaction with non-mutants and with those who are opposed to them. And then on the other side is a guy named Eric Lensher, who we later learn is also known as Magneto. His philosophy is the complete opposite of Professor Xavier's, and that is one of violence and resistance. And so that's kind of the backdrop that's set up in this movie. The story really focuses on two mutants named Rogue and Wolverine. We're introduced to Rogue pretty early in the movie. What we learn about her is that physical contact with her. So when a person comes in contact with her skin, it causes her to steal your energy, steal your life force, and that can really be physically devastating, as she learns when she kisses this boy. The implication is that when she realizes something's wrong, she goes on the run. She ends up in Canada, and in Canada she meets a guy who goes by the name of Wolverine. His real name's Logan. He has the ability to rapidly heal from any injury that he has. That unique ability, his mutation, led to a secret government experiment in which metal called adamantium was grafted to his skeleton, and he was turned into a secret super weapon, which eventually led to him also being given these claws, these blades that come out of his hands, and he was a walking weapon. He's kind of just a vagabond, sort of living on his own, living out of his truck up in Canada. And these two are both attacked by Magneto's people But in that confrontation, they're both saved by Professor X's people and taken back to the School for Gifted Youngsters. That's where we're introduced to the rest of the X-Men, very specifically Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Storm, along with Professor X. The story leads us to believe that Magneto is after Wolverine for some big plot. It's not entirely clear what he's up to, and so the X-Men and Professor X try to figure out what's going on. We learn, as the audience, that Magneto's actually developed a device that can trigger mutation in non-mutants, and he's kidnapped Senator Robert Kelly, who is a leading proponent of mutant registration, and tests it out on him, turning him into a mutant, but there are really terrible side effects with that ultimately kill him. And what we learn is that Magneto plans to use this on a much larger stage, and that he ultimately needs Rogue to accomplish this, not Wolverine, because of her ability to absorb a mutant's powers. And so he can pass his powers to Rogue, and therefore she can be the one to trigger this machine to mutate a number of people on a large level, and that would ultimately take her life. So the movie moves towards ultimately a fight between the X-Men and Magneto. They are able to stop him from unleashing his mutation device on what appears to be all of New York City. They're able to save everybody. There's some important character development where we see Wolverine making a transition from a self-centered jerk to sacrificing himself to save everybody, especially Rogue. And they all live happily ever after. But not quite, because the fear of mutants is still out there, despite the fact that Senator Kelly is dead. And, of course, they leave plenty of loose ends there at the end set up for a sequel. The movie really kind of sets the stage. It really is very much sort of a beginning movie in a lot of ways. That sort of introduces us to this very unique world in which mutants are a reality and people are scared of them and don't know quite what to do with that. And we're brought down to the level of the mutants where they're figuring out how to navigate their way through this world that they live in as well.
That's right. This is a movie of politics as well as superpowers. That's one of the trademarks of the X-Men series for sure. Bryan, what do we think about this cast?
This is one of those casts that was really an all-star cast. It still would be today, but it was a really all-star cast at the time. So we'll start with Hugh Jackman, because this movie really catapulted him into the limelight. He was a good actor before and everything, but I think Wolverine really was that defining character for him. We also have Patrick Stewart as Professor Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen, who's I'm a huge fan of, as Eric Lyncher and Magneto. Famke Janssen. This is actually the second time she's come up in 2 weeks. I just want to point that out. As Jean Grey. James Marsden as Scott, quote unquote, Cyclops. Halle Berry as Aurora Monroe or Storm. Anna Paquin as Rogue. Tyler Mane as Sabretooth. Ray Park, who is actually in a ton of stuff after this. We'll probably bring that up later, as Toad. Rebecca Romijn as Mystique, Bruce Davison as Senator Kelly, Brett Morris as young Magneto, who I gotta say, that's one of the most understated parts of this movie is the intro.
Loaded cast. It was a big cast. I'm surprised this movie is not more expensive than it is. Its budget wasn't as big as you would think, given the impressive nature of the cast. We talked about this movie revolving largely around Wolverine. What do you guys think about that, Bryan?
Wolverine is probably the most visible member of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He is frequently on, the top 5 list of favorite superheroes. He's a very likable character, in my opinion. I like him the same way I like Raphael in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, since we keep bringing that up. He's just one of those very forefront characters. He's got a big personality. He's a smart ass, and he's a tank. So he's just one of those guys that you can do a lot with and really make him a center of something.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I never liked Wolverine in the cartoon. Tends to be a lone wolf. He's not a team player. He's moody. He goes off on his own, angry a lot, and kind of a lone wolf. And I didn't care for him much. This movie goes a long way to make this character far, far more likable. I don't know if you agree with that, Aaron.
No, I think you're right. I was thinking it's been so long since I've seen the cartoon, and I'm like you. That's kind of where I never read the comic book, so that's where my interest in X-Men kind of came out. But you're right, he was much more of a curmudgeon and kind of just a grumpy guy overall, even though he was my favorite. And I think I'm with you, Bryan. Like, I think he's the most compelling probably of the X-Men. But they softened the edges a little bit. You could tell that they wanted to make him this gruff kind of, curmudgeon's the word I used. He has elements of that in this movie, but they certainly did soften him to some degree. From the minute we meet him, just about, like, he is interested in the welfare of Rogue. And so that's not something that you're not surprised at the end when they are friends, because they're kind of already setting you up for that early on. So yeah, I'm with you. They did make him a lot more likable.
Do you like Hugh Jackman playing the part, Aaron?
Oh, no question. This was kind of his first major Hollywood role. And I mean, it's probably, when he's dead and gone, this is probably going to be the role that he's remembered most for. It's just, it is perfect from physically to, everything else he was able to do with it. He nailed it, I think.
I could be wrong, but I think it's 7 movies that he plays this role in. It's the 3 for the trilogy of the X trilogy, 3 for his own movies, the Wolverine movies, and then he's also in, I believe, additional one of the new ones with Days of Future Past. Oh, and Age of Apocalypse. So that's 8 by my count so far.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to replace him with anybody else, I don't think. It just wouldn't. You just have to retire the character, and when he does eventually make his appearance in the expanded Marvel universe now, they're going to have to give it some time to settle, I think, probably.
He was very good, and Hugh Jackman said he prepared for the role by taking ice cold showers in the morning before filming. He did this initially. So when he first did the role, he had no hot water, and so not to wake his wife, he was just sitting there gritting and bearing at 5 a.m. and a cold shower always starts your day off horribly. But he felt like that shocked, awake nature of having to hold it in and always constantly be wanting to go off. That's what he did to put himself in the frame of mind to be Wolverine. So if you want to be Wolverine, Bryan, take a cold shower.
I do that every now and then in the summer anyway. It gets pretty hot and dry out here. Just waiting for those claws to pop out.
A very interesting part of how Hugh Jackman got this role. I don't know if have either of you guys heard about this one. There's a lot of alternate castings out there. Other people that were considered were Mel Gibson, Aaron Eckhart, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Viggo Mortensen, Edward Norton, Bob Hoskins, Keanu Reeves, and Gary Sinise, who actually think Gary Sinise would do a pretty good job of this. Dougray Scott actually got cast for the part, but conflicts with Mission Impossible 2 arose, which also comes out in the year 2000, and he was injured on a motorcycle accident, and then they actually kind of came back, and they asked Russell Crowe, who was somebody who they really wanted initially, before all those other guys. Crowe turned it down, and he said that he didn't want to do a comic book movie. Odd, because he later goes on to become Superman's dad. But anyway, he said he didn't want to do this. And furthermore, when they came back to him the second time, he then suggested his fellow Australian and friend Hugh Jackman for the role. Pretty fun reference there. Bryan, did Russell Crowe make a good choice?
I like Russell Crowe a lot, but I'm not for that. Yeah, literally a quick no on this because, one, I look at what Hugh Jackman did for that role, and I outside of the actual first Wolverine movie, which was just bad because it was a bad movie, I have a hard time picturing anybody else for the role of Wolverine, and if I had to, I would say, if they were going to do it as a younger version going forward, I think I'd like Scott Eastwood for the part.
Okay. Interesting. It's something interesting is, the character in the comic books is not a 6 foot tall guy. Wolverine's like a bowling ball. He's a short guy. He's a very hairy guy. He's got lots of, his sideburns are super hairy and his arms are super hairy. It's kind of interesting. This movie made efforts to, make him more appealing with the ladies. He's stands in probably at 6'2" or something like that, and he's absolutely ripped. I was actually sitting there thinking, Gary Sinise fits the description of what I think of the comic book character being a little more, but I think Russell Crowe made a good choice by passing it on and saying, you should get this guy to do it.
Yeah.
We got some heavyweight British actors. What do we think about Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart? Aaron?
I'd say perfectly cast again. Bryan, like you were saying, Patrick Stewart is just kind of the quintessential, like, bald, smart guy. Like, you couldn't put anybody else in that role, I think. With he just is typecast for that, at least based on, all the drawings of him that I'd ever seen. Ian McKellen, the guy's just cool. This is probably just too simplistic, but there's something about his voice that, I'm seeing Gandalf when I hear him talk, obviously, but it just gives the weight to the way he speaks. And I think that in this movie, at least the character of Magneto, there's a lot of like weight and seriousness behind the cause of Magneto and how he comes to these decisions. And that movie, it comes out a little bit in the movie based on his family history. Like, he's experienced this sort of alienation multiple times throughout his life, but it just, I don't know, there's something about the way Ian McKellen just kind of presents himself and carries himself, and I think his voice especially, like, it just is powerful.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Lord of the Rings, because this almost didn't happen. He almost had to turn down Lord of the Rings because of his commitments to do X-Men, but after talking with Bryan Singer about it, they rearranged the movie shooting schedule to coordinate better, and Sir Ian McKellen was able to be both Magneto and Gandalf, and thank goodness, because he's good at both of those things.
Yeah.
I'd also like to tip my hat just a little bit for the casting of young them for X-Men First Class. McAvoy and Fassbender are just great choices. I especially love Days of the Future Past, where there's literally crossover between the two, and gosh, that's just awesome. It's just awesomely exciting, and especially when they add little lines and quips in there, like, at least you still have your hair.
Yeah, and and by the way, I really enjoyed those movies. In many ways, I thought that that second go-round series has been better.
Agreed.
I'm with you. I think that's a lot of fun how they cast those two. I would debate and say that these are the two most important roles, and they did it so well both times. I'm a little disappointed. Maybe the fact that Wolverine's not my favorite X-Men comes through on this, but I wish this story revolved a little more around Magneto and Professor X. Just from a storytelling standpoint, I wish that they were more the central focus.
I think they took that more into account in the second go-around. Like, it really is central to...
You're right. And that's probably why I like those movies better. It's probably a big part of that. You're right.
I actually haven't seen those. So I saw these first three, and then I haven't seen any of the other ones. So
I highly recommend them.
Yeah, well, I know I'm going to have to. I'm inspired to see them now. I think so. Here's the thing. I think if you were going to looking back through the lens of like what Christopher Nolan did with his movies, I think if you added maybe another half hour to 45 minutes into this movie and to make it a little bit more dramatic, then that would be the way to go. Like, tap the skill of those two guys and explore that relationship a little bit more. That would have been awesome, because I would say, I mean, they only have a couple of scenes really together, and it's mostly like dialogue, but I mean, couldn't you just sit and listen to them talk to each other forever?
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, and no flashbacks either. And some other fun alternative castings: Kirsten Dunst, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Christina Ricci, Rachel Lee Cook, and Catherine Isabelle were all considered for the role of Rogue, as well as Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman turned down the role. Ultimately, it ended up going as to Anna Paquin. Some other interesting alternative castings: Janet Jackson and Angela Bassett were considered for the role of Storm, as well as Jada Pinkett Smith. Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Ethan Hawke were all considered for Cyclops. Jem Caviezel was offered and turned down the role. And for the role of Jean Grey, Maria Bello and Lucy Lawless were also considered for the role of Jean Grey. Shorter list of candidates there.
Wow. I didn't know about the Lucy Lawless thing.
How do you feel about that?
I'm not for it. I mean, I like Lucy Lawless fine, but honestly, my biggest complaint about Jean Grey in this is she looks, and I really don't mean this in a mean way, but she looks older than everybody else in the movie except Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. So it's harder to put her in the student category. I mean, they start off with her basically addressing Congress. So, Marsden looks young. Halle Berry looks young. Like, I bought it from basically everybody but her. And even when they go on to future movies with like Colossus and Nightcrawler and these other folks, it's harder.
She's only 4 years older than Hugh Jackman, though.
Right, but Hugh Jackman's supposed to be, 320 in this movie. Like, that's fine.
She's also only 2 years older than. Sorry, she's also only 2 years older than Halle Berry.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just it visually looks a bit off.
Okay, that's fair. I mean,
I feel like there's not team synergy on the youth appearance.
I was okay with Jean being the age that she was, perhaps because I always just like Famke Janssen being in movies, but and
look, I mean, absolutely no offense by any of this. I love her as an actor. I have no real problem with her being Jean Grey. I just felt that visually it didn't match up across the 3 X-Men that aren't Hugh Jackman.
Cyclops, Storm, and Jean are full-grown adults in this version of it, and they're not students. They're part of the administration.
I get that, but they don't look it. Like, they constantly say, oh, they were some of my earliest students. So you're still looking at it as a student, a pupil teacher perspective. And Jean Grey seems more the part of teacher than the other two.
Okay. Aaron, any age play concerns?
I hadn't really thought about that at all. It's interesting that you say that. So that was my question, was how old are they really supposed to be? You said Jean Grey is testifying before Congress, and isn't she a doctor? She's referred to as Dr. Yep. Jean Grey, so she's got to be older if she's gone through any kind of, I don't know, I guess doctor is in medical training, but
I'm not saying what their actual, you could tell me that in the movie they're all the same age, and I'm just saying visually she seems more, and maybe older is the wrong way to put it. Maybe she's just more
mature.
I wanted to say she's just more stately. Like, she pulls more of the Professor X than the others. The others seem more.
Well, this gets to one of my big omissions in the movie. Certainly one of my favorite X-Men, who's not in this movie, who should be doing the senator, scene, would be Beast. I think that might help balance things out a little bit for you. Maybe had Beast been in here.
I think they were trying very hard to steer clear of anything requiring heavy makeup and or CGI. Like, I think they had that a little bit more figured out when First Class came out, and they really wanted to stay true to who was actually in the first class of X-Men. But
you could be right about that. But that's unfortunate, though, because I really like Beast.
There were some fails on that too. So,
well, I'd noticed when I was looking around online, they said that they cut like Nightcrawler, Beast, the Danger Room, and a few other things because of budget. Like, the budget was too much, or they were worried about it being too high, and so those guys literally just got cut out because they knew it was going to cost too much.
I guess maybe what I would suggest here, and maybe this would be better for change one thing, but I'll go ahead and say it now. I think this movie could have used less star power and more X-Men.
I like that.
Like, they could have brought in a bunch of extra people. Like, let's say you don't go with Marsden, you don't go with Halle Berry. I think you could have kept Anna Paquin just because she hadn't done True Blood yet, so she wasn't huge. Keep Stewart, keep McKellen. Jackman wasn't that big yet. So you could keep the core of what makes it, recast Janssen, Marsden, and Berry for other people. Basically, if you cut their salaries in half and then doubled the X-Men. So, like, toss in Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Gambit.
Well, this like I said, this movie does not have my top 3 favorite X-Men in it, and that would be Nightcrawler, Gambit, and I'm not asking for Bishop to be in here, but he's, for dramatic emphasis, that rounds out my favorite 3.
And you do get that later, too.
You do.
Doesn't it surprise you how small the cast still seems, even though it really is like, it got all these stars, and it is... maybe again it's looking at it through the lens of Infinity War or something like that. Like, wow, there's not that many people in this movie overall.
Oh,
they really got by with a small cast.
You are totally right about that. I mean, especially nowadays, this would be looked on as a miss. Probably, I bet it would not get the score credit it does if this were to come out next to any of these Disney movies.
Bryan, you mentioned earlier you were excited because Bryan Singer was known for being the director of Usual Suspects, and you were excited to see that his name was attached to X-Men. What do you think about Bryan Singer as a director, not as a person in his personal life? He's been accused of some bad stuff, but just as a director, what do you think of Bryan Singer?
He's very hit and miss. His early work is really what drew me to him, and I would never say I dislike the guy because he brought X-Men to the screen, and I needed it, and that really kicked off all the superhero movies. So everything we have now is based on the success of X-Men First Class, or I'm sorry, of the first X-Men movie. So, you know, I love it. But when he did like Apt Pupil and Usual Suspects, I mean, those were just really like wow movies. I can't say enough good things about it. And because of the success of those two, then comes X-Men.
Aaron, what are your takes on the direction of X-Men?
I thought that there were some cool little maybe flares in it, and this may address your question, but like a couple of times there were some shots that I thought were just really compelling, and sometimes it centered around like sort of showing off some of the powers that they had. Bryan, you referred to the opening scene in the concentration camp, and I think that's full of like great shots, including like where the barbed wire like is turning down and pointing at the guards as like the kid is just getting more and more inconsolable and screaming. And then when they sort of show the shot of the gate just wrecked, like, I don't know, the way that entire scene was filmed, I thought was pretty cool. And then to me, kind of, I think the one, like, my favorite sort of shot is in the bar when Wolverine first shows his claws. And so he's got one hand out on the neck of the guy that tried to stab him, and the other one after he had cut the shotgun open. So he's standing there with one hand on the guy's neck and the other pointed at the guy with the gun. Like that, just, you could freeze that shot forever. And it's just, to me, that's pretty, I don't know if iconic's the right word, but he hit that pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
It's interesting at the time. I remember thinking the idea of putting X-Men in movie format to me struck me as odd. Where I have always wanted it to be was a live action TV series, and where I really, really started to want that is when Netflix started producing Marvel content like Daredevil. If we could have gotten an X-Men show like that, that really is where this belongs, because it's almost a fool's errand to try and go out and tell all these stories, because what happens is Storm and Cyclops and Jean are all absolutely underutilized. They're just appendages almost. And like we mentioned earlier, Professor X and Magneto are really take a back seat. And I'm already somewhat resentful of Wolverine getting too much credit and attention and the X-Men. And so perhaps my displeasure with it the first time came from the fact that they said front and center, this is Wolverine and Rogue. And I don't know that works as well, because I read that they were excited to bring Bryan Singer in as a director because on Usual Suspects, he handled an ensemble cast really well. And it's true. When you watch that movie, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there's all these different characters and you get a little feel for each one of them. And it's not just about one of them. It all comes together as a group. And in the end, one or two of them might have a little more of a priority with what happens in the story. But through a vast majority of the movie, it's really how a group works together, and he gets you into it really quickly. He gives you a little flavor of who they are, enough to make sure that you understand the dynamic of what they bring to that group. And I wish that same skill of ensemble directing had carried over to X-Men, because I don't think it does. I'm
with you maybe a little bit on that, and that's, like I said, when I watched this the first time last week, like the timing seemed off. It had a strange rhythm to me. And maybe that's because he was trying to do so much. Storm is just a refuse character in this movie. The character herself is awesome, but she really doesn't do anything in the movie other than have one really bad line at the end.
Yes.
And that's it. Like, it was hard for me to put words on how the rhythm seemed strange. And the second time through it felt better, but maybe Russ, that's what you're saying, is like maybe he just wasn't quite sure how to do this, especially with the budget that he had in the time. Because I also read that they had their timeline cut short 6 months because the studio wanted it early or something. So maybe that contributed to it too. I don't know.
It's possible.
Could be.
I just think X-Men would do better if you laid it out and said, we're going to do 7 of these movies from the beginning. And if you know you're going to do 7 of these movies, it's going to turn out a lot better. And I thought, even at the time, you have to do this episodic nature of it if you're going to do this right. And they did go on to make many movies, but I don't think they knew that at the time. I think they felt the pressure of making one really good movie to make sure that they could do everything else after that. And that's why it had to be Magneto right away. It had to do all this stuff. And they couldn't set up a more I guess, sustaining plot like a Star Wars universe. But when you think about it, and in fairness, even at the time I wanted this, movies like this Harry Potter does not start until the next year. The Lord of the Rings series also does not begin until 2001. The MCU does not kick off until with Iron Man in 2008. Really, Star Wars or The Matrix more so are there are a lot fewer examples, I should say, about a series of movies that builds a universe. And this movie kind of suffers it, kind of what you guys were talking about. These other movies kind of eclipse it. I believe a large part of that has to do with because they laid out an ambitious mission and overall storyline before they even began. So they didn't have a story to tell over the course of 7 movies. They made one, then they made another, then they made another. And yes, that's how comic books are written, but I don't feel like these movies as a series capture that.
Well, there's an overlying arc to comic books too. There's always an end game, if I can use that for this, with comic books. So you always have what the bigger picture is, and you're completely right in your point that this being the progenitor of a lot, or basically of superhero movies, they didn't know what they were going to get out of this. And because it was widely considered to be a fantastic success, they didn't know the monster it was creating. Because you now get to go back and look at it and be like, well, it was that. That's just kind of us. I will never really crap on this movie because look at what it gave us. I mean,
did it though? Because Superman came out in the 70s. Batman was there in the 80s. You had other movies along the way too, in the 90s. There's a little bit of a lull, and it's true. This does come out before Spider-Man, and once Spider-Man comes out, like everything's like it's the next explosion of superhero movies. And you're right. But
this kicked off modern day superhero movie fever that is the juggernaut that it is today, if I can use that key in there too. But yes, this absolutely kicked off everything that we know and love about comic book movies now. And it was a test. They were dipping their toe into the water and they found it very nice.
That's an interesting take. I guess I give more credit to some stuff that had gone before it, but I guess you feel like the 2000s era, the game of the superhero movie changed in your mind.
We should also include Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in this because that's a comic book movie and awesome.
Oh man, I still pleading the fifth.
I guess my point with like the early Batman movies and even the intermittent Batman movies, and I say that with dread and sorrow in my voice, and Superman and all this stuff. Yeah, sure, they made comic book movies, but they were all standalone bastions of popularity. They weren't anything close to what they are now. There was little to no continuity to them. Even in the Michael Keaton Batman movies, there wasn't continuity to it. This kicked off, and I call it modern comic book movies because this was the beginning of a bigger picture, and it took comic book fans and non-comic book fans seeing something like this and seeing it as an action movie, not just a comic book movie, to really get the fever stirred that later would become what it is now, the MCU as a whole. So, and this one, because it kicked it off, it is a hybrid of the comic book movies you had before and the comic book movies we enjoy today, because they didn't know what the big picture was going to be. They didn't know this was going to be a success. So they were writing one at a time and having them very insular.
Fair words in defense. That's all well said. What do you feel about the atmosphere, like the locations of this? We're supposedly in New York, in Westchester. It turns out we're actually in Ontario. almost exclusively, and we're in Canada. But Aaron, what do you feel about the places they chose to shoot?
It's just funny because we were talking about power of place. The places are not really defining, I think, of what this movie does. I mean, everything's very, very micro, I think, in the way it was filmed. Like, it's not, other than sort of being up in Canada, and so you do get a little bit of sort of appropriate sort of setting there.
What about the Academy? I mean, this is like the center of the X-Men. This is like the base of the X-Men. What did you think about Charles's school for the gifted?
Yeah, I think it was fine. I think it kind of captured, I guess, what that's supposed to be.
I would be interested to know how many film minutes, so how much of the actual movies is a shot outside. Because I just thought about it and I was like, okay, so there's Wolverine in Canada when Rogue pulls up to a bar. You've got Wolverine on a snowy road. You've got a handful of shots of people sitting on benches outside Xavier's school.
Train station.
Like, even when they're in the train station. No, but that they're in a train station, they're in a train. There's no all right, when they're leaving the train station and cops have guns pointed at them. I mean, they're very small shots. Like,
and all those could have been done.
Sweeping.
Most of those could have been done in sound stages too. So
right. I think
Brian,
Aaron's absolutely right.
You get what I'm saying is that it's all very sort of micro. It's not sort of big pan out.
And
it gets.
I'm wondering. Yeah, I'm even wondering what they used to shoot coming up to the Statue of Liberty, because that's really the biggest scene in terms of mileage that you can see on film.
Well, a little bit about where they did not shoot the classes room in the mansion and all that. That was on a location. There's something called the Parkwood Estate in Ontario, and it was actually the residence of Samuel McLaughlin, the former founder of General Motors in Canada. And so it's decadent and extravagant, and it's a 1916 building. And if you're recognizing it at all, I was going to say this is also Billy Madison's house, and it's also Lex Luthor's mansion in Smallville. And if you watched Arrow series from DC and from the CW currently on TV, this is the Oliver Queen mansion as well. So many superheroes, as well as Billy Madison, have resided in this same Parkwood estate.
I will say that the one thing I didn't like about locations was just senseless acts of violence in a museum at Ellis Island. I'm not in approval of that.
No fighting in the museum, he says.
Correct.
Well, so that's the exterior of it. The actual interior of it, they shot at a different place outside of Toronto, and that's called Castle Loma, and that's a 1914 building. But that's also a real place. I had certain visions of the richness of Charles Xavier's school, and that is one of the moments of this movie that I did deliver what I wanted. So,
cool.
Obviously, the room where Charles Xavier puts his helmet on and Cerebro, that is not a real part of the house.
What?
I'm imagining Billy Madison down in that room now.
What's this helmet doing down here?
I'm going to get that penguin. Send him back to the zoo. What do we think about the look of these characters? Because, I mean, the change from animated comic to actual real-life translation can be a little bit tricky sometimes. They even made a fun little mention of this, like, would you prefer to wear yellow and blue spandex?
Yeah, I like that joke.
Yeah.
That's a good joke.
So what do you think about this? Do you like their black leather uniforms? And
I like it. And this is one of the things I was thinking about when Bryan was talking about sort of kicking off what we know of as superhero movies today, or comic book movies. I mean, I think that was sort of a decision that they had to make. How are we going to do this? And the way they went, I think it probably did anger some hardcore comic book fans, but it was kind of the right thing to do. It gave it a sense of grounding it more in real life. And I think that was part of back to the bigger picture here, it's a way to make it serious but not campy. And I think that maybe is what sets what we know of these movies now apart from some of their predecessors. Like even the Tim Burton Batman movies, they still had campy elements to them.
You bite your tongue, sir.
I'm not saying that in a bad way. I like them. Like, that first Batman movie is excellent. But there was still it had elements that you would not find in some of these today, and I think even in X-Men, and I think they found that right balance, and I think that is encapsulated by the costumes that they wore. And I love how they could take it seriously, like just poke fun at themselves, poke fun at the fact that these people have stupid names sometimes, like what do they call you, Wheels? Like, they're not too serious about it. They're willing to make jokes about it and acknowledge it, but realize, like, hey, we're trying to make movies that are a bit more relatable. And I think, based on what I was reading, there was one of the reasons that Singer was interested in this movie and what attracted some to the storyline is because of its parallels historically to things like the Civil Rights Movement and the clash between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and sort of very real, personal stories here of people that are outcast, people that are different. You know, at the end of the day, it's easier to take those stories real when you're not running around in blue and yellow spandex.
You're right about that, and Singer didn't want to do it. You're right, and it wasn't until he later found out more about what the X-Men were about, as you mentioned there. Perhaps even connecting to it, I think he is a gay man himself, I think he mentioned, and that the nature of fighting for rights and equality, you had mentioned it's a story that's told over and over again throughout history, and so he got into it and he watched all of the cartoon, he went back and read the comic books extensively, but he did do something odd. He asked the cast not to read any of the comics and gave them scripts instead and just told them to stick to that, but luckily none of them listened. Patrick Stewart in particular said he wasn't familiar with his character, but he went back and really enjoyed reading about the character, and he said it's some of the most fun research he's ever had to do for a role.
Interesting.
Yeah, but Bryan, what about you? Who do you think looks the best in this movie as far as what translation from superhero to screen goes, and maybe who disappointed you the most?
Patrick Stewart, hands down. He is quintessential Professor X. I really can't say that enough. Really, Sabretooth sucked.
Yeah.
Pretty hard. I didn't like Liv Schreiber's Sabretooth either.
Oh.
So, yeah, I have a rough one here. There hasn't really been a satisfactory Sabretooth yet.
Oh, I like Shriver's Sabretooth. This one I do agree with you, though, is undercooked and under-considered.
I'll say Shriver is better than this one, but it's still not where I want it. And I'd even be willing to give him another crack at it. It's just that movie was terrible.
Okay.
That was just the worst.
So you're not a fan of Sabretooth. Okay. What about you, Aaron? Anybody particularly please you in terms of the translation from the comics to the big screen, or vice versa? Anybody disappoint you in particular, and like, that's not the look of the outfit or the costume or the uniform that I wanted?
Maybe a bit simplistic, but I just enjoyed. I mean, I really enjoyed Wolverine, and that being sort of central to the story, I thought it was just generally a highlight. I will say, maybe just Storm, even though her character just kind of felt worthless to me in this movie. I kind of like what I like the look. They didn't have to do much with her. She kind of matched, I think, well, what you would expect. So I think they sort of got the look down, right? But the character was just kind of window dressing, for lack of a better term.
I'll tell you one that I was disappointed in, both from a choice of plot as well as from a choice of wardrobe. Cyclops did not come off as I wanted to. And I quite like James Marsden for the role, but I did not like his eye apparatus. It did not seem nearly as cool as I imagined it would be. And furthermore, I'm really disappointed that they made Cyclops to be such a... Again, this movie is very partial to Wolverine's character, and so the feud that those two characters have, they've pretty much made it seem like, oh, Wolverine's good guy, and, you know, Scott or Cyclops is a bad guy, and or like not a bad guy, but not a villain, but like more like you know, Jean doesn't want to be with this guy. We can all see that. And I think part of the comic book that's interesting is that real struggle that goes between them. Personally, I like Cyclops a lot, and I hate to see what they've done with his character here.
I did think, though, that Cyclops kind of came off. You're talking about his like the eye apparatus. Like he just kind of felt helpless to me at times. Like you take that off of him, he can't do anything. He seemed very helpless in so many situations. Toad rips it off his face in the train station. Well, he's just going to shoot a hole in the roof, and he can't do anything else. Like we don't even see how he gets out of there when they're in the Statue of Liberty. You better close your eyes, take it off. He can't do anything until somebody tells him to open his eyes. So it just seems kind of, he seems helpless
In the comic books, he is the leader of the X-Men. There's a period of time where Charles Xavier goes out of the loop and he's not around, and Scott holds everybody together. You don't get that off of this character.
And this guy's like somebody he loses his glasses and he's completely worthless. That's kind of how he's portrayed in this movie now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
They really didn't do any character building for the X-Men themselves. And if you look at really Wolverine, most of his character building they're doing off of genetic testing and supposition. This is not the best movie in terms of character building for really any of them. They focus on Wolverine and Rogue, but outside of one shot of Rogue almost killing her first boyfriend and some flashbacks in Wolverine's memory, like there's really no depth to any one character.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one moment of things that do look really good, though, this is a lot before CGI, so they're doing a lot of this work through, older techniques. Rebecca Romijn Stamos at the time, her costume work for Mystique looks excellent. And she really suffered for this one. It takes 7 to 10 hours a day for them to apply the blue makeup and suit on her. She could not have any skin creams or wear other kinds of makeup during the time, and she was often segregated off from the rest of the crew. She'd be in her trailer while they were shooting other stuff, and so she didn't really feel like she was part of the rest of the movie. She said she felt like she made a different movie than everybody else. In the end, it still looks really good. A lot of work to get her to look like Mystique.
There was a note that I read on the special effects, and I just thought it was funny. It said, in the late 1990s, computer-generated imagery was becoming more commonly used. Singer visited the sets of Episode 1 and Titanic to understand practical and digital effects. And I'm just like, wow, that's where he had to go to learn. Like, that's where we were in 1999 and 2000. Like, I don't know. I just found that humorous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'll be honest with you, the fight scenes on this have not aged well. I do remember the time thinking we were a little like the fight scenes didn't deliver, but today that feeling has magnified considerably. The wire work where the actors are on wires and kind of have this crouching tiger, hidden dragon nature, like floaty nature. As you mentioned before, Tim Burton puts you into another world in Gotham City. It's not America. It's whatever country, it is America, but it's DC Universe America. It's different. It's a fantastic realm. And perhaps this wire work would do well with that. But the problem is this X-Men movie was already grounded. They established that in the beginning with this Holocaust scene. So that scene looks really good, as you guys mentioned. But man, the fight work with Toad and like some of the people getting thrown through walls. There are some rough moments technically in the fights.
I believe it.
I also remember coming out. I remember thinking this like at the time the movie came out. Like again, here we go with Wolverine, but thinking that was I wanted more out of Wolverine. Like this dude's supposed to go just nuts on people, and we didn't get that till the sequel when he finally started unloading on people more. But
well, you got 3 more movies of it.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it was kind of at the time it was dissatisfying. I remember thinking. And like you said, knowing again, looking through the lens of what we know now, like you're like, wow, that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody have any feelings on the soundtrack here? Superhero soundtracks are often an important role to raise the moment and set the theme. It's just part of the feeling. I just idolize this cartoon, and as Bryan mentioned earlier, he loves the theme song from the cartoon. I was a little disappointed to see that theme wasn't adapted and modernized and maybe put into an orchestra for this. But what do you think about the score that they did use here?
The only time I remember ever noticing the score was sort of in the fights at the end at Ellis Island, and it wasn't terrible, but I remember thinking it sounded a little, I don't know, it didn't sound great.
It is purgatory for me. Like it was there, but it's not memorable. It just is.
Okay.
It existed.
I wanted something more epic, personally. I wanted more than this. Again, Batman's a high benchmark, but Danny Elfman did such a great job with Batman. It's a big part of the texture and the feel of the movie. And while some of the locations that they chose to shoot it in this did deliver what I wanted, the environments did, the music did not give the full epic nature to me. So I was wanting a little bit more. Again, the Holocaust scene, it was really good in that scene. And so that delivered, the music delivered there. But for the rest of the movie, not as much for me. So.
But again, like I try to take this with a grain of salt. We're really brutal on this movies because we are living in a golden age of this type of movie. And even with soundtracks, we're spoiled because, I mean, we get Game of Thrones and like just these truly epic songs that go along with epic things. And it was basically, unless Hans Zimmer did it back in the 90s, you didn't get a ton of that, like those songs that really stick with you. Like I always cite Crimson Tide for having like that song or the score for that movie was almost as big as the movie was. So I just feel like we're also very spoiled now. A lot of movies are swinging for the fences on these soundtracks. Almost all of the teen dystopian films had phenomenal soundtracks. Like I mentioned, Game of Thrones and Westwood with, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, Ramin Djawadi. I'm not sure how you spell his name or how do you pronounce his name, but he's absolutely fantastic. And then you have things like Baby Driver that, you know, the movie and the soundtrack are so intimately interlaced that the movie almost was a soundtrack, just a big music video for it. Or Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, one of the highest grossing soundtracks ever because the soundtrack was interlaced and important in the movie. So I try to take all of these aspects into account when I judge this movie because it's like blaming the guy who does the kickoff for the end score of the game.
Well, they went to John Williams and they wanted him, but he was busy and couldn't take the job. So they went to the right man. So I can't help but say John Williams would have helped here. I'm sure he might have been busy with Harry Potter. That comes out very shortly thereafter. So.
And Harry Potter's another one. I mean, absolutely fantastic job making that mystical, magical feel.
It's time to go in to look for this. Aaron, are there any fun moments, anything off the beaten track, any fun facts you want to share with people?
I was looking on IMDb and just sort of going through the trivia, and you guys might have seen this, but I'm just wondering, like, could anybody just get on there and make something up and say, yeah, this actually happened, because there was no sources on any of that stuff. The reason I say that is because this was my favorite piece of trivia that was listed on IMDb. And you can edit this out if you need to. But it was just simply one sentence that said, Hugh Jackman got his testicles caught in his harness after a 6-foot jump off the set Statue of Liberty. And that was all.
Oh, that sounds terrible. I mean, like, literally terrible. Like, that's...
Like that sounds like...
At least they healed afterwards.
Yeah, you're right. I'm laughing more at just the kind of trivia that is just sitting on the internet, and there's no way to prove whether that's real or not. So
I don't know about that, but apparently there's a movie that Andrew Newman, who came on the Coming to America episode, absolutely loved, where Hugh Jackman has testicles on his chin, and he absolutely relished this as his favorite comedy movie moment.
Movie 43.
Yeah,
that really does happen.
So.
So anyways, that's all I got for you on that. That was,
okay.
I'm just laughing more at the comment and how there's no way to actually prove that. And there was no source, and
the internet's never wrong, man.
There you go.
If it's on the internet, it has to be true.
That's true. So there you go. His testicles got caught.
There you go. Most of these things come from Blu-ray and DVD features as well. Bryan, what about you? Look for this.
I just want to toss out there that on Aaron's comment, 384 of 395 people on the internet found that interesting. So 11 people apparently were not amused. A small minority were like, that's stupid.
I don't feel like that number is representative of people's real interest. I'm just saying.
If I'm going to call BS on one thing, and this could be true, but this is where I would call BS. It says on the internet that neither Patrick Stewart nor Ian McKellen knew how to play chess during the filming of this movie.
Seems off.
I'm pretty sure the British know how to play chess.
I don't want to make it like a British thing. I'm just saying, like, these are two stately gentlemen. If they really didn't play chess, sure. There are people out there that'll shock you that don't know how to ride a bike. I get it. Know how to swim. totally get it. So maybe it's true, but wow.
Every time I play backgammon, I have to learn again. Like, I've learned it 3 separate times, but it's like always from scratch. So if you sat me down to a backgammon table, I wouldn't know how to play. So my look for this moment is going to be James Marsden. Despite being 6 feet tall, still had to wear platform shoes. They wanted him to appear taller than Hugh Jackman, who is 6'2" and taller than him. He also wears these platform shoes, and they can clearly be seen as Cyclops scales the wall at Liberty Island. And I actually am questioning if it's Hugh Jackman he needs to look tall next to. Famke Janssen, who is his his girlfriend in this movie, she is listed at 6 foot tall, and she's a very tall lady. My guess is that they wanted him not to appear on eye level with his female love interest. So that's my guess.
She's gonna come kick my ass for the old comment.
Do you prefer the GoldenEye Famke Janssen with Xenia on a top, or do you prefer the Jean Grey Famke Janssen?
Is that even a question? Like, I feel like there's a real clear answer to this one. Yeah, I'll go GoldenEye all day on that. But on what you were saying about characters' heights, that was an oddity piece for me about this, because Wolverine in the comic books is about 5'3".
Yeah, he's a little guy.
Like, he's a little scrapper.
Which makes sense. The actual creature, the Wolverine, is small, and it's feisty. You don't want to tangle with it, but I mean, it's not a bear.
Actually, I'll bring this up real quick, just because it's one of my favorite Wolverine moments, and one of the reasons he really is in more endearing in the comic books than anywhere else. There's a part in X versus A. It was a series where the X-Men fought the Avengers over a New Mutant, and in order to get Wolverine was actually batting for the Avengers at this point. He agreed with them, but this mutant came to him, and he was in Antarctica, where he had been flung, I believe, out of an airplane, and he killed a giant polar bear, and he's wearing this giant polar bear around in Antarctica, and he finds a beer in the snow. He picks it up and he drinks it, and a little bit later he finds another beer, picks it up and he drinks it. Finally, he gets to one of the X-Jets, and Hope, who is this mutant that the Avengers are trying to kill, is sitting there with a beer in her hand, and she's like, "We need to talk." And he takes the beer from her, and he goes, "You have until I finish this beer."
Nice. I like that.
And it's like, I love his character. Like, his character is just fun.
You know what time it is, Aaron? It's time for some superlatives. You ready, man?
Yeah,
Who is your MVP of X-Men?
definitely Hugh Jackman.
All right, I like it. So I might have seen that one coming. Bryan, who is your MVP?
I'm pretty settled on Patrick Stewart.
I'm actually gonna go with Bryan. As mentioned before, I'm not the biggest Wolverine guy, so I'm gonna go with Patrick Stewart as well. Professor Xavier is one of my favorite X-Men. Best supporting actor, Aaron.
Probably Ian McKellen. Those are my top 2, I think, in this.
I like it.
Whole
Ian
film.
McKellen's my best supporting actor too. What about you, Bryan?
Then it's all 3 of us. His dialogue, which we just discussed, how you can sit there and just listen to the 2 of them go back and forth for much, much longer. The dialogue between the 2 of them is just fantastic.
So, who is your hidden gem?
I don't know. I don't really have a good answer here. So I'm just, for whatever reason, I thought of when Toad's jumping on those security guards, the guy that's off camera that goes, "Ugh." That's my hidden gem.
Okay. Okay. Deep cut. I like it. In fact, I love it. Bryan, who's your hidden gem?
Anna Paquin. This was a big kind of coming out party for her. She did a lot of great stuff after this. I was a huge fan of True Blood. I just, I didn't know who she was when this movie came out, and she thoroughly impressed me in this movie and then going forward.
Interesting. More on that later as well. As for me, on the hidden gem, I'm going to go with Bruce Davison, who plays Senator Kelly. He's pretty despicable, and I like what he did as the guy who's leading off the charge of the Mutant Registration Act. I thought he was a great villain, and I think he leaves the movie too soon. It's unfortunate. If you were to recast somebody, Aaron, who would you recast and who would you put in their place?
I think that outside of Professor X, Magneto, and Wolverine, I'm not married to anybody else in this movie. So change them all, and I wouldn't have felt strongly about it one way or the other. I don't think that anybody else really hit me in a certain way. So replace everybody, mix them up. I don't care.
Well, we're about to do that probably because Disney now owns the rights to this, and
Right.
we're probably going to get a total reloaded, recasted line. And I'm going to be sad to see McAvoy and Fassbender go.
I agree on that. That they are definitely worth keeping. I also like the young woman who's playing Storm right now. I feel like that was a solid casting. I really liked them going back to her grungy original look with the whole mohawk thing. That was a really solid bit of work they did there.
What about you, Bryan? Who's your recast?
I'm actually with Aaron on this. You could really do pretty much anything you wanted to, but I'm actually going to take it to the two people I like the best in this movie just because I read something interesting about this, and it was a recasting of Liam Neeson as Professor X and Jeremy Irons as Magneto.
You know what? I love the guys who did it, but I have to say, if these guys didn't do it, those guys would be good. So those are good. Those are interesting, if nothing else, for sure.
Yeah, I just thought it was different. It was kind of thinking outside the box. I could totally see Jeremy Irons as a Magneto character. That would be really cool. However, if you flip the script on it and flip those two guys, I could see both of them doing honest justice to the other character. So it was, like I said, it was an interesting article I was reading about that.
As with everything else in this movie, this cast is something that's very lopsided. I've never seen a movie that gets it so right and so very wrong at the same time. I really love Patrick Stewart, and I really love Ian McKellen, and I mean, Hugh Jackman is great as Wolverine. I think James Marsden was awesome. But I had a hard time narrowing it down here because Sabretooth is truly terrible, and Storm was awful as Halle Berry. And I think also the guy who plays Iceman, Bobby Drake, that's not what I want from that character either. Small role.
Yeah,
but
he's supposed to be wisecracking, and actually, in the current comic books, he's also a homosexual character. So it wasn't true of it at the time, but if they really recast it to do honor to the comic books right now, they got to change that up a little bit.
Yeah, and so that becomes a bigger problem later in the other subsequent movies. So I'm going to let Bobby Drake off in this movie. And by far, to me, who was the worst in this movie was Anna Paquin.
Ooh.
I thought that she was...
Wow.
I've not... unlike Bryan, I've never liked her in anything she's done. I have not seen The Piano where she gets her Academy Award. She doesn't look like the character Rogue, and her acting is really rough at times. The Southern accent is not at all Southern. It just feels like a British person trying to do a Southern accent. We're talking like Daniel Craig and Tomb Raider bad performance of an American. And so I thought we needed a character that looks like Rogue from the comics, as well as is a much better actress, and I'm going to suggest Bryce Dallas Howard for the part. She's only 1 year older than Anna Paquin, and she would have been the right age, and she's just a much better actress. This would have been pre-Village, if just a little bit before the Village, if you want to have a rough idea for where in her career this would have hit. So
It's funny that you bring up her accent because she legit goes on to do 81 episodes of a TV show in True Blood that takes place in Louisiana where she has a Southern accent.
Well, I there's even an internet YouTube series that says, everything wrong with X-Men in 5 minutes. One of the good lines on this was, the people who actually made True Blood said, yeah, that's the Southern accent we want. Mockingly. So anyway, sorry about that. I know that was your hidden gem, and so we're battling there. But what is your best shot of the movie, Aaron?
I'm going back to Wolverine in the bar when he's first his claws come out, and I don't know if you guys are like me, but when I was a kid watching the cartoon, I always wondered, like, could he ever control? Did the claws always come out together at the same time, or could he? I was always like, this would be so cool if he could like control certain ones at a time, and I never remembered seeing that in the cartoon. And so when that middle claw came out slowly at the guy's throat, I was just like, finally, somebody gets it.
An answer.
Yes.
Actually, I love it when he flips off Cyclops after he sets off the metal detector.
Yeah,
like, that was my favorite claw.
Yeah, so I think that, well, and I said this earlier, but like when he like is standing there with his claws at two different people, I think that shot is too cool.
It is a good one. What about you, Bryan? Best shot.
I'm going to go with the concentration camp in the beginning. That scene has a few real moments of import. Favorite shot, I'm going to go back to the concentration camp shot at the very beginning of the movie. Like I said earlier, this movie is pretty bereft of character building, and that's just, it's such a moving scene to show you why Ian McKellen feels the way he does. He's really down on humanity because he lived through one of the darkest things that humans could, people showing the man's inhumanity to man and why Ian McKellen is this bitter warrior.
My favorite shot of the movie is when Mystique makes a roundhouse kick and she morphs from being Wolverine back into being Mystique and the same aerial kick. I really like that. That was a cool moment that they put in the trailer, and it was my favorite shot of the movie. So, Aaron, what was your favorite scene?
Well, as far as scene goes, I think since we're showing love to the opening concentration camp scene, I would agree with that. We haven't talked about the outside of the train station one after they kidnap Rogue. And I think that was when some of the powers, the mutations are featured. And so when Magneto is just without any effort at all, he's just throwing cars in the air, snatching guns out of the policeman's hands and turning it around on them. Like, I think that scene was pretty cool. And just to see the interaction between him and Professor Xavier, even though they're nowhere near each other, I thought that whole scene was just cool. It was a good way to sort of feature how these guys can interact with not just each other, but other people.
No, it's a great choice. Bryan, what was your favorite scene in the movie?
I'm going to go with the chess game between Professor X and Magneto at the very end. So I've talked about the very first shot of the movie and now the end of the movie. So I thought that was a fantastic wrap-up scene.
That's a great one. For me, I'm going to go with the Holocaust scene. That was your favorite shot. I just thought all of this was really amazing. It was emotionally poignant. It was character-driven, all the things that you said, and that's what made it my favorite scene of the movie. It peaks early. If you had to change one thing, if you're Bryan Singer, what would you do? Well, not okay. Bad way of putting that. If you're the director of this movie, Aaron, what one thing do you change?
So this is a problem that I guess I have with movies in general, and I understand why it's done. And especially with the X-Men here, the love triangle between Cyclops and Wolverine and Jean Grey it was always kind of an important part of the cartoon, and I imagine the comics as well. But Wolverine's known this girl for 2 days, and he's coming out of a coma, and he's saying, "You can tell her my heart belongs to somebody else." You've just met this woman. Like, there was no reason to put that in there. I think some of these things, even though I know that's a part of the mythology, it was unnecessary in this movie. It was contrived and it was forced, and it was just, you didn't need to. That's an important part, and I'm sure a lot of fans would be looking forward to that. But it just, for a movie that was trying to be a bit more realistic, like it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
So that gets under my skin, and that's generally the case with a lot of movies, but especially this one. Like, they were trying to force it, and it just came across as stupid to me.
I think that this movie feels rushed in many ways, and what you're saying is a prime example of that. That's a very astute observation, and would be a very beneficial change. What about you, Bryan? Change one thing.
More X-Men.
Who do you most want to see in here?
I'm a big Gambit fan. I really do like Gambit.
Yeah.
I would say either him. I got Nightcrawler in the sequel.
If you bring Gambit in, you can actually do Rogue's real story, where like they kind of cross paths early on, and they're working with Dr. Sinister, and they actually are bad guys, but then they reclaim their image and they get on the right path through Charles Xavier, and that's a far more interesting story than the Rogue that we got.
Yeah, you really do. You get more characters as the movies go on. So, a lot of the guys that I like, or guys and girls that I like, I'm a big Psylocke fan too. I was happy she finally got some screen time. I would say my first is probably Gambit.
Yeah, that's high up there for me as well. If I had to change one thing, and if you haven't guessed already, there are many things I would change. I would say slow down. That's a general comment, and that goes along with what Aaron was saying. Magneto does not have to be the bad guy the first movie. You can set up his character and his relationship with Charles, and you can watch the friendship that they have disintegrate over this fundamental T in the road that they hit. That would be an interesting emotional conflict to have them go through. Senator Kelly's a good enough villain to have this be a political message. It would be neat to have Charles have an issue with how the school's being run and have the government try and shut that down. It would be neat to see the X-Men bring Wolverine in and to tell the backstories of these characters. Sometimes just simply ending the movie with saying, like, we're a team and we're going to have to be united at the end of this thing, while Magneto says the Brotherhood is going to form separately, and that's where you cut off the first movie. That, to me, is how I would rather do this. And the only way you're going to do that is to have the faith that you're going to have a second, third, fourth, maybe even a fifth movie, and to know it right off the bat. And maybe they didn't have that luxury, but I think if you're going to make an X-Men movie, you have to put faith in it. I thought that even at the time, and that's not that is not me saying that now after the MCU came out. I felt that way even in 10th grade.
Just everything you just said is why Batman versus Superman will go down as probably the worst superhero movie ever made.
Catwoman.
No, there is Catwoman. There is Catwoman.
Wow, you just got defeated there, Bryan. That was awesome.
That's
you just went slinking away after all he said was Catwoman, and you were gone.
Yeah.
Does
that even count? Does it count as a superhero? Are we counting Catwoman? God, it's even worse because it's Halle Berry.
The movie that made us think maybe we should take Halle Berry's Oscar away. The Academy called and said, no, you got to give that back. Best quote of the movie, Aaron.
There were some good one-liners. I'd said it earlier. What do they call you? Wheels? I thought that was good. And apparently somewhat ad-libbed, yeah. So
yeah.
I'll stick with that. There were a couple others, but that was a good one.
What about you, Bryan?
When Hugh Jackman goes, "Wait, it's me. How do we know? You're a dick."
Yeah, that's all right. That's a good one. I'm surprised nobody picked what happens when a toad gets hit by lightning. The same thing as everything else.
So bad.
Oh man! And actually, I came very close. I wanted to pick Halle Berry for my recast. I thought when I saw Angela Bassett could have played this, and for those of you who don't know who Angela Bassett is, that's T'Challa's mother in Black Panther. She's got presence. She's got this commanding nature about her. Halle Berry does such a bad job with her accent in this as well. She did such a bad job with her accent in the other movies after this. They told her just go with the American accent. Don't just drop it. Don't even try anymore.
Again, Aaron, I'm excited for you to watch the newer X-Men trilogy so far because the girl they got to play Storm is just fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, no disrespect to Halle Berry. This just wasn't
a little bit of disrespect to Halle Berry here. I think
Catwoman.
So and hey, I'm just saying, Die Another Day happened as well. I'm really questioning this Best Actress, Oscar-winning Halle Berry nature. So, anyway, best quote of the movie.
Oh, you didn't like Swordfish either, did you?
No, I did not. I mean,
wow.
she was eye candy in that movie. I don't even think. No, that I don't know, man. That's I don't know.
I enjoyed that movie. Also with Hugh Jackman.
Also true. It's true. So anyway, my best quote of the movie is going to be Magneto says, "You know this plastic prison of theirs won't hold me forever. The war is still coming, Charles, and I intend to fight it by any means necessary." Professor X responds, "And I will always be there, old friend." Before we get out of here, Aaron, do you want to plug anything? Maybe tell people about where you work?
Yeah, I work at a historic site called Shaker Village of Pleasant Hill. It's we have over 30 original 19th century structures that stand from a communal religious society that was there from 1805 to 1923. We've got great programming, great exhibits, great history, great story to tell. We have riverboat ride on the Kentucky River. We have farm and garden. We have dining, lodging. We have a nature preserve with nearly 40 miles of trails. So there's a little bit of everything for everybody. So come to Central Kentucky and visit us.
Kentucky's so much more than basketball and horses.
And bourbon, which is the 3 Bs that they're throwing at you these days. Got a lot more than that.
Time to come full circle, the moment of truth. On a 5-star scale, Aaron, why don't you go first? What do you give X-Men from 2000?
I went 3.5. So it was good. It wasn't bad, but not great.
Bryan, what do you rate X-Men?
I'm going to give X-Men a 4, just a solid 4. Again, X-Men is my favorite comic book group. I give it a 4 because I'm a very strong believer in what this movie did for comic book fans who wanted movies. And I give it maybe more credit than it deserves on really kicking it off. But basically, I saw this movie and then I got to enjoy the last 20 years of comic book film.
And that's a good outlook on it. I'm probably being a little harsh on it, but I'm going to give this one a 2.5. There are things I love about this movie, but the problems are many. And like I said, the fundamental concept and the approach to it was a hard thing for me to overcome. Again, Halle Berry, Anna Paquin don't help matters. You know, I think I don't take this as an excuse when I think Tim Burton showed us how to make a really good superhero movie before this, and The Rocketeer was such a good superhero movie before this, and Superman, and I don't know, I don't put all the credit on this one for kicking everything off. So,
and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, back to that. Yeah, but anyway, I have a top 50 superheroes movie countdown, and X-Men 2000 is just sitting on the outside of that in the honorable mention category. So it did not make my top 50.
Wow.
It's a genre I love. Well, Bryan, it's time to pick a movie for next week. You ready?
I'm excited already.
I like it. So we're going to do some cult classics. A cult classic is a movie that may not have necessarily taken the world by storm initially, but grows to have a very dedicated following over time. So some cult classics that I'm going to throw your way. Option number 1, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975. A newly engaged couple have a breakdown in an isolated area and must pay a call to the bizarre residence of Dr. Frankenfurter. Option 2, Death Becomes Her, from 1992. When a woman learns of an immortality treatment, she sees it as a way to outdo her longtime rival. Option 3, Pink Flamingos, 1972. The notorious Baltimore criminal and underground figure Divine goes up against a sleazy married couple who make a passionate attempt to humiliate her and sees her tabloid-given title as the filthiest person alive.
Oh gosh, I've never seen that one, so I'm tempted. But I tell you, I very, very vaguely remember Death Becomes Her being really good. So I think I'm going to go with Death Becomes Her. I'm excited to give that one a rewatch. It has definitely been like over 20 years.
I have never seen it myself, and the title intrigues me, so I'm in. Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, and Bruce Willis.
Well, it's Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis.
Aaron, thank you so much for joining us and talking about X-Men. We really enjoyed having you on here. It's great to see you again. It's been too long, so I hope you had fun.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I had a good time. It was good talking to you guys.
And Bryan, thank you as always.
Always a pleasure.
Yes, and thank all the listeners for listening. To all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, we invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. That feedback is not only helpful to the show, but it helps others find the show and helps us build our brand and share our movie-loving community with the world. So also give us a like on Facebook. We definitely want to see from you. Every week we're going to post comments on the movies, and we want to hear back from you. Argue with us. Tell us why we're wrong. Tell me why Anna Paquin's awesome. And email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com if you have any ideas for the show or want to go into extended dialogue, if you want to be on the show. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Bryan?
Wise men say forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for late pizza.